Then let's start. Mr. Grandi, almost 6 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of the war. It is the fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War in Europe. How challenging is the speed of this dynamic that we're seeing?
It's incredible because this exodus of almost 6 million has happened in less than 2 months. But I must say that the good organization of the reception of these people, the great solidarity that has been displayed by European people and European governments have greatly helped. By the way, for a long time we heard that Europe was full, that it couldn't take any more people, that they had to go back, that we had to push them back at sea, at borders, and this has proven that Europe is capable to receive a very large number of people in a rather efficient way.
We'll get to that later, but focusing on the current situation still, many states have agreed to send money, they have agreed to give aid. What is it that the people fleeing from Ukraine need right now most pressingly?
In Europe, I would say, in European states, they need to be inserted in social services, schools, health systems, for example. Many of them, if this situation is protracted, and it might be, depending on how the war goes in Ukraine, will also need to have some sources of livelihoods. Governments and the UN and other organizations are distributing cash assistance, but this is limited and cannot last for very long. So that will be an important element of support. But if I may say quickly, another important point, we need to pay particular attention to very vulnerable groups. Women that have suffered violence, that may be trafficked, children that are separated from their families. Those are important needs, and it is important that governments focus on them. We will continue to help them do that.
Now, as you said, most of the people fleeing actually are women and children, and millions have managed to get out of the country, but it's been difficult to create sustainable humanitarian corridors in some areas in Ukraine, for example, the city Mariupol, meaning that aid isn't reaching parts of Ukraine that need it. What about the people that can't get out of Ukraine right now, that would want to flee, but they can't make it?
You're absolutely right. Well, on the one hand, remember, there are people that have fled from those places of war and have taken refuge in other parts of Ukraine. Displaced people, there's maybe up to 8 million of them. So that's one group, but those people can be reached and can be assisted. But you're very right, the biggest challenge is those that cannot even become refugees, cannot even become displaced because war blocks them in besieged and bombarded cities. And you know very well, you have seen Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, negotiating in Moscow, in Kiev, access to Mariupol. We were able, the UN and the Red Cross, to evacuate a number of civilians, but there's many more there and in other places that still need desperately assistance, and we're very, very worried about that.
Briefly follow up, what are you going to do about those people?
We will continue to make every possible effort to have access to them and to help them when they get out of these traps, of these besieged areas. But to do that, we need we need guarantees of security and of access by the parties to the conflict. In particular, if I may say, by the Russian military forces, and this negotiation is difficult, but we will continue to do it.
Coming back to your first answer, where you praised the good organization and the solidarity in Europe when it comes to taking in the refugees, if we contrast that to the response to the Syria crisis, for example, in 2015, when there was a lot more political restraint in Europe when it came to refugees, does that mean that the Geneva Convention in Europe counts for Europeans more than it does, for example, for Middle Easterners?
Well, the Geneva Convention certainly does not apply to people differently. And Europe does not have geographical reservations as in the past some countries had. So If this happens, if a discriminatory application of the principles happen, this is wrong. Now, we can understand that there is a lot of sympathy for Ukrainians. They come from next door. Everybody can see why they're fleeing. But it is the responsibility of politicians to explain that everybody who is fleeing from war, violence and discrimination merits attention. If their case is genuine, they should get asylum and protection. And I think that politicians, and we've seen some of them that say the contrary, say, let's go and see the real refugees from Ukraine. The others are not real refugees. This is not only irresponsible, this is shameful and racist.